The survivors of Bergen-Belsen remember the fear, the cold, the pain, the shame. Worst of all, they remember the constant, all-consuming hunger that left them no respite. Yet Rebbetzin Esther Jungreis recalls that even in those awful times, the most important source of nourishment was the bread of faith. Every day in Bergen-Belsen, her father made them count the days. 5 more days, 4 more days, 3 more days, 2 more days, 1 more day. And then, children, it will be Shabbos. Each day, he would hide away a few crumbs of his meager daily ration. And then, when Shabbos came, he would gather his children together in that hellhole and whisper to them in Yiddish,
Meine lichtige Kinderlach,
my precious lights, my children,
macht sie die Augelach.
Close your eyes and imagine that we are at home. Mama just baked delicious challah. Even as he spoke, he would bring forth those precious crumbs that he had saved at great sacrifice throughout the entire week. And in his sweet, beautiful voice, he would sing, Welcome, angels of Shabbos. In that moment, they were transported to a different time and place. They felt the warm glow of the candles and smelled the delicious fragrance of the Shabbos meal. They were enveloped in holiness and love as the angels held them close. On one occasion, the Rebbetzins' younger brother tugged at her father's hand and said, Tati, I don't see any malachim here. Where are the angels of Shabbos? Her father's eyes filled with tears, and in a trembling voice, he answered,
Ihr lichtige Kinderlach.
You, my precious lights, you are the angels of Shabbos. So it was that in Bergen-Belsen, they became the angels of Shabbos.
All right, so not the happiest of stories. Probably not our favorite to watch, but at least it's a powerful about the sacrifice that people have had over the years for keeping Shabbos. I'm trying something new. My wife figured out how we can share 2 screens, and I am trying to figure out how to do this, but let me do this again. No, 1 second. Let's try that again. Okay, now you can hopefully see, yes? You can see the screen. Okay, so I want to just tell you a little bit about this course that we're actually doing called Judaism at Home. What it does is it goes through some of the most fundamental ideas in Judaism. And it just goes through practically how we do them and also the reasons behind them. So a lot of you may know about the reasons, but you would definitely know a lot of the practices. But when you put the 2 together, it actually comes quite interesting. That's number 1. Number 2 is, even if you don't personally expect to be practicing, it's always good to know. And put it this way, it's giving you an insight. There's all types of people that are watching it now live, and then there's going to be people that are going to be watching this in the future. Last week, I recorded class, a few people watched, and they all come from different backgrounds. So these two first classes, we focus on Shabbos. We're going to be focusing on practical things for Rosh Hashanah, getting close to Rosh Hashanah, how to do Rosh Hashanah at home. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but that's the way it's looking, like at least parts of Rosh Hashanah, and for some people it'll be all of Rosh Hashanah. So we're going to try to make it as practical as possible, how to do things at home, and make it as meaningful as possible. So start with Shabbos. We're going to do things like davening in the morning, and what are the prayers, why, washing, what are daily rituals that some people do and the reasons behind them. For some people, this is fundamental, basics. Other people, this is totally novel things that they feel like they would never do. Chaimushka, just 1 second. Chaimushka, do you mind turning off the music? I'm not able to concentrate with the music in the background. Sorry about that. Okay, so I think this could be really fun and interesting parts. Hello, Ruven. Shalom Aleichem. Welcome. Let's go through some of these things. I'm going to skip a few slides because I don't want to actually go through davening this time. Whoops. Let's go back. No. Okay, so let's start. Today what we're going to focus on today. Today it's going to be about well, 1 second. Oh, now I'm really getting confused. Sometimes when you get two screens, it makes things less. Could I maybe put my notes onto that one? Got my notes on the wrong screen over here, so okay. Could you see me fine?
Yeah, what do you want to do?
Okay, all good. Okay, there's two parts to Shabbat. There's something called Zachor and Shamor. Zachor means that you have to remember. We spoke about why we have two challahs, why we do things. It should be good. Just tell me that looks okay. That's fine, because I can't see what you guys are seeing right now. Zachor and Shamor. Zachor means to remember. Basically, it tells us to the do's. Where do we get this concept from? In the Ten Commandments, when it tells us, there's twice that the Torah tells us the 10 Commandments. The one is in the original place of the 10 Commandments in Shemot, and the second time is in Deuteronomy. We had it a few weeks ago in Vers Hanan. Now, the first time it said, it's describing when God mentions it. When Moshe repeats it, he changes the words when it comes to Shabbat. And instead of saying, remember Shabbat, he says, protect the Shabbat. Why does Moshe change it? Because the first one is telling us things that we have to do to remember Shabbat. The second one is that even though you're doing things to remember Shabbat, Moshe wanted to teach the Jewish people, also remember that you should not forget Shabbat. And the way you do it is by not doing certain things. So why do we have all these laws? What's the purpose of having these laws and these restrictions on Shabbos? The basic understanding, I'll give you an analogy that I recently came up with, which I really like. Sometimes we look at restrictions as being very limiting. You know, if I can't cook on Shabbos and I can't drive my car necessarily on Shabbos, or there's certain things that I'm not supposed to do, it looks like it could be very limiting, and why would anybody want to be part of such a thing? But the way Judaism sees it is the way those guidelines, they limit us, but they help us reach our destination. So for example, if you're a captain of a ship, you could look at the compass as something that is totally to follow the rules and the directions that the compass is directing you. You could look at that as something which is debilitating and putting you under pressure and making life rigid, or you could look at it as the thing that's the thing that's going to take in the direction that you want to go. And that's the way we generally would look at it. It's all about the perspective. We spoke about this a little bit last week, but because this week we're actually going to focus on some of those particular laws. So let's talk for a moment about what we know is work and what isn't. Ooh, I missed out something. Sorry, my computer keeps on taking me in all different directions. My apologies. Okay. It's okay, it's okay. All good. It's not working when I press on current slide. I think I have to stop this one first. Okay, now it's working. Okay, I got it to work. Sorry. I sometimes when you get fancy, you actually lose what you're going. I have no idea what's going on over here. I'm not very technical at my wife sets up all cool things. We've got 2 screens set up here tonight. I took my son's the computer we're using for my son's school, and it keeps on throwing me off. This is Peter's favorite dish. Peter, we're getting this just for you.
Peter, I saw it just now.
And are you ready to see this, Peter? I don't know if you want to see this,
I saw it just now.
but this is something that you have to see. Are you ready?
Yeah. How does I know the cylinder, which we're going to talk to you about?
Could you see what's on the screen, Peter?
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you see on the screen?
I can see it. Believe me, I can see it.
For some reason, I can't hear well. So what's on the screen is cholent. Last week, we finished off with going over a basic summary of Friday night. Today, we want to go through the whole Shabbos, but I want to start with what we eat on Shabbos day. Shabbos day really is very similar to Friday night in the sense that we also make Kiddush.
Yeah.
We also eat challah. We don't sing Shalom Aleichem. But what we do is we do make Kiddush, we eat challah. We do try to eat meat and fish, similar to what we did on Friday night. Now, there's this concept of cholent. Now, where does cholent come from? Cholent is Peter Finkelstein's favorite dish. Where does it come from? It says it says in the Torah on the fire. Sorry, it says in the Torah. Sorry, you shall not cause a fire to burn in any of your dwelling places on Shabbos. That's what the Torah says. Now, that sounds like we are not allowed to have any fires going on Shabbos. Now, there was the Tzedokim, the Sadducees, that they said the reason, or what the Torah is coming to say, is that we're not allowed to have anything hot on Shabbos at all. Nothing hot, no fires whatsoever. So therefore, what did they do? They used to sit in the dark, and they used to eat cold food the whole Shabbos. The rabbi said, no, the Torah is telling us that we are not allowed to light a fire on Shabbos, but you are allowed to have something which was lit before Shabbos staying hot over Shabbos. So the Chachamim then made a takana, which means like a decree, which would be something which would be, they made this numerous times in order to override a teaching or to make people stop doing something which is false. They would make a preventative law. So this decree was that people should try to eat something hot on Shabbos to show that you're not a Sadducee. Why? Because Sadducees didn't believe in the oral Torah. The oral Torah tells us that you're allowed to eat on Shabbos hot food as long as the fire was lit before Shabbos. So they made cholent. So that's how in Ashkenazi groups they came up with cholent. Now, Joe has a beautiful opinion about where cholent comes from. Joe, you want to tell us quickly? What's the name of cholent come from, in your opinion?
Certainly. Yeah, I'm happy to share it. You can all hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a story, an explanation that was told to me by my late father relating back to life in Przewozk in the village back in Poland. And we were talking about family history, and the topic of cholent came up, which he pronounced as shulent. he said to me that because the family back home, they had a kosher bakery, they had an oven, and he related to me how people would come to the shop, to the bakery, before Shabbos, Friday afternoon. They would come. The oven was not cooking challah anymore, but it was still hot. And the villagers would come with their various pots containing the stew, and they would put it in the oven to keep it hot over Shabbat. And after davening on Shabbos morning, and after Musaf, and the davening would finish, they would then go back and they would retrieve their hot dish from the oven to eat at home. And he told me about this story, and then he said, so the reason it's called sholent or shulent is because shul end, the end of shul.
Okay, so thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. Now, we don't have that much time to focus on cholent, but for those that want a great cholent recipe, now there's actually numerous different opinions of where the name shulent comes from, but none of them are decisive. And I actually like Joe's story the best. Some people think that it comes from a word which means fully prepared in French or some other. There's different opinions of where it comes from, but the truth is, out of all the ideas that I've come up with, Joe's story definitely sounds the most reasonable.
Except for one thing.
Go with it.
He said a stew. You're talking about vegetables.
Okay, so some people say that you can, Peter, shouldn't could be anything. So listen to me. In Sephardic communities, they have something very similar, just a lot spicier. And today we kind of had made a mix of these two. When you have a good, like, with a Sephardic Chabad Dingli, where we mix in all the different types of people, we mix in cholent varieties with spices and who knows what, and we today are able to mix and match. So it could be nice and spicy. But there's something called, so Sephardic actually called it chamim, which makes sense. What does chamim mean? Hot foods, because that was the idea. The Chachamim's takana was the decree of the rabbis was that it had to be hot. So they called it hot. So the truth is, you can fulfill this obligation by having a hot cup of tea in the morning. If you had your coffee in the morning, you've also done it. Although the tradition came to have a cholent, and they discovered that if you left vegetables to cook overnight, you could work. Now, for somebody like Peter that loves cholent so much, he would rather leave that for the weekdays. So he'll have like chicken or meat or something. No, just kidding. Peter wants you to know that if you're ever having over in his house, he does not like cholent. So please, you can make it, but don't expect him to eat it. All right, so moving on from cholent, let's just look at a few things about cholent. Okay, so it has to be on the fire before Shabbos. This is, Peter, a Shabbos delight, and all the rest of us. And this, the reason for it is because it confirms our oral tradition that we are going to do it. Now, I want to look at all the rest. That's the unique, cool thing about Shabbos. And of course, we know that at all shuls around the world, and especially when Chaim Mushke is making the cholent, it is definitely a favorite of most. So there's 39 categories. And by the way, a cholent could be made up of anything. The Taiwanese, they have this like pastry with eggs. It doesn't even have vegetables. So it's made of like a puff pastry. It sounds more like Peter's style. I think maybe for 1 week we'll have to get, I think Billa is a Taiwanese, so she can make it for us maybe 1 week. Anyway, so we'll go. I don't know if they call it, not jachnun. Anyway, we'll figure it out, but we'll make sure that we get a taste of all the different types of cholents. Let's go more over an overview of all of what Shabbos allows us to do and what. This is a very, very basic summary of the laws of Shabbat. So in general, the laws of Shabbat fall into 39 categories of forbidden work. Okay. Now, where do we know about these categories? Where do we figure out? The Torah does not tell us these 39 laws. They're called avot melachot, the 39 principal laws of the Torah of what we are not allowed to do on Shabbos. Where do we know this from? It's from the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And because of that, the laws of Shabbos were told to us that we're not allowed to. We were building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and comes along Moshe and he says, "Lo ta'aseh melacha," do not do work on Shabbat. From that, we learned that we weren't allowed to do our laws. So let's look at what these 39 melachos are. And I'm going to talk to you about how we come about what they actually mean. But they fit into generally 4 categories, but we've divided it up into 5. What are those 4 categories? 11 of the first 11 of them are referred to things that relate to baking. The 13 of them relate to making of garments, because in the or cloths. So it's about shearing, slaughtering, tanning, all those things that would make people. Why? Because in the Mishkan they did these things, leather making, etc. Then the next one is building, and those are the general 4 categories. And then the 5th one is carrying, which really fits into the category of building. But for our sake, we were going to just leave it as something separate. But if you were to, I want to tell you something really cool. For this, I'm going to have to pause my, could you see this? No. All right. If you look at your tzitzit strings, okay, I'm just showing you tzitzit strings for a moment. In the tzitzit strings, there's 5 knots. Now, the tzitzit strings make up the word tzitzit. Why do we wear tzitzit? One of the things that the Torah tells us about the word tzitzit is that it's a numerical value of 600. And if you take, there's 5 knots, plus each corner has 5 knots and 8 strings, that equals 5 plus 8 plus 600 equals 613. To remind us that the tzitzit is there, to remind us of the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. So when we wear our tzitzit, it reminds us of the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. Now, taking that a step forward, between each knot, there's these circles of strings. So there's one long string, and you tie it around all the other strings. Those fall into 4 categories. You have to tie once 13 times around, then you do a knot, then you do 11 times around, then you do a knot, then you do 7 times around, then you do a knot, then you do 8 times around, then you do a knot. So it comes up to 5 knots, or you do a first knot, then all these circles. And what does it tell you? That hinted to in the tzitzit is the Shabbat. What's the connection between tzitzit and Shabbat? That both tzitzit and Shabbat are a representation of the whole world. It says anybody that keeps Shabbat is as though he keeps the entire Torah. So just like the tzitzit reminds us of the entire Torah, like it says in the Torah, that you'll look at the tzitzit and you'll remember the Torah. It reminds us, it's there to remind us of the Torah. So to Shabbos is a testimony on the entire Torah. Why? Because the Torah, Shabbos, is to remind us of creation, which was created by God. Okay, so that's something really interesting. Another thing that's interesting is, if you know when we say the Shema, of course we know is the fundamental prayer in Judaism. It says Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Correct? Now the last words Hashem Echad, God is one. If you take the numerical value of the name Hashem, I actually told Peter this today. Today is Peter's 52nd anniversary. So a big mazel tov to Peter. But one of the ways, the numerical value for Hashem's name, if you take just the letters themselves, is 26. It could also be 52 if you calculate it in a different way, which I told it's a special Kabbalistic thing. But basically, God's name is, the numerical value of God's name is 26. Plus, if you add on to that the word Echad, so Hashem, Echad is 13, Aleph, Chet, Dalet, 1, 8, and 4 equals 13. 13 plus 26, I'll let the mathematicians do it, that equals 39. So the 39 laws of Shabbat reminds us of the one God. Okay, so hopefully you've learned something new. Now, when we're going to talk practically about these laws, one of the major misconceptions about the laws of Shabbat is that we're not supposed to work on Shabbos, right? And the word for, how do you say work in Hebrew? Avodah. So, one second, I'll go back a step. Not wrong direction. Okay, so when we're talking about work, there's two types of work. Are we allowed to, what happens if you have to move and set up the table for 100 people that are coming to your Shabbos meal? Is that considered work? Why not? Or what happens if, I love the story of the, let's just call him a non-Orthodox rabbi that was his community, he tells his community, listen, on Shabbat, you're not supposed to work. Please don't work on Shabbat. And then they walking home, some of his congregants, the one Saturday afternoon, are walking, and they walk past his house, and they see their rabbi or rabbinitz, whoever it was, busy mowing the lawn. And they say, Rabbi, you told us not to work on Shabbos. And he says, well, I don't consider this work. Okay? So mowing the lawn, he didn't consider work, but he or she misunderstood one of the fundamental concepts in Judaism, is that it doesn't say the word avodah, it says the word melacha. Now, what does the word melacha mean? Not avodah. So avodah is just strenuous work. Avodah is allowed. Us as rabbis, we know that one of our busiest days prior to pandemic days was the day of Shabbos. We all worked on Shabbos, but we're getting paid for Shabbos. Is a different story how that works halachically. But Shabbos is a busy day. What happens if you have to walk, and then you have to give a drosha, and then you have to do this and that, and set tables and clean up? Is that all work? What's the difference between that type of work and malacha, the things that are forbidden? So the difference is that malacha, first of all, the Torah specifies what those works are, what the categories are, and it learns them out from the main categories that were done, what are the main things that were required for the building and the work in the Mishkan and the tabernacle. Because the Torah says, Lo taseh malacha, don't do these things. So what are those things? Whatever you did over there, stop. And then it has anything that are subcategories of this. And that's why we have thousands of little laws that could be related to it. And I'm going to go over the major ones. But I want to make some level of clarity in your minds what it means, melacha. Melacha means something that is unique to human capacity, something that is unique to human beings, in the sense that it's something that is making a positive, or has the ability to make a positive change to the status quo. So if we go over, for example, the laws of baking, it goes through planting, sowing, watering. These are things that are making difference in the physical status, or baking, making a fire, building, dyeing. These are things what we call creative. When it's a creative action, it's forbidden. In other words, it's doing something of a change to the physical thing. But if it's not any change, it's not going to be a problem. So therefore, when you sit at the table, you're just taking things and you're moving them, it's okay. The certain categories are going to be allowed, sometimes they're not allowed, but those are the general categories of when we're allowed to do things or when you're not. So if it's something that is going to be changing, so a rhino could also push a table, that's allowed. But a rhino is going to struggle to have a neat cut of the grass, or to make a fire, or to plow the land in these things, only if they're directed by human beings. So it's something that can be done for the positive growth in the land, something which is creative. Just like God created the world in 6 days, on the seventh day he stopped, we're not supposed to make improvements to the physical world on the seventh day. Okay, is that clear? Any questions? Beautiful. All right, so let me go a little bit practical of what it means to us in today's day and age. I'm not going to go through all the laws and all the PowerPoints that I have over here. I'll go through some of them. Now, in general, anything to do with gardening is not allowed on Shabbat. Okay, so I'm just going to try to simplify it. The watering, anything to do with sewing, Yana, you have to rest on Shabbos. Your work is not allowed. My work doesn't do anything, so I'm allowed to do it. So anything you can see, you could doing a gluing, all these are the different things. So we're just revising what is permitted if it doesn't make a positive change to nature. It doesn't make a difference how many, that's called avodah, that's labor. So just like God, that the Shabbos testify that God is a supreme creator, so too we're not allowed to do things that are going to make positive changes. So what happens about destroying? Are you allowed to destroy something on Shabbos? So the answer is that if you're destroying on purpose to build something afterwards, then it has a positive outcome that you're trying to achieve. That would be forbidden. So we generally don't destroy, because usually these type of destructive things would be used in the temple. Second. Okay, so let's get a little bit more practical in our modern lives. What are the things that we should and shouldn't be doing? So, oops. Yeah, it's moving. Okay, so let's talk about electric things. When we're talking about cooking and baking, if you wanted to just have a basic overrun of what I had to do, let's say I want to keep 1 week Shabbos, what do I have to do? So I can't put food in the oven, in the microwave, on the fire. I'm not allowed to extinguish the fire. I'm not allowed to lower the fire or turn off the fire. Now, I'm just going to tell you that these laws would differ. These particulars, almost all the laws of Shabbos are equal to the laws of Yom Tov, of festivals. The only place it's all different is that I'm allowed to do most things that have to do with cooking, except for turning on a light, or turning on a fire, or turning off a fire. Why? Because I could have turned off the fire. Anything I could have done beforehand, I'm not allowed to do. So I'm allowed to do cooking on Yom Tov as long as I have my oven already on. But I'm also not allowed to turn off the oven. So it becomes a little bit tricky, but we're allowed. That's how we have hot food, and we're allowed to make new food on Yom Tov. So just bear that in mind. But otherwise, all laws on Yom Tov, on a Chag, Rosh Hashanah is coming up, would be the same as a Shabbos, of course, except for Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur has exactly the same laws of Shabbos. There's no cooking allowed on Shabbos, and you're also allowed to carry on Shabbos. By the way, one of the exceptions that I mentioned to you, something that's not creative that we're not allowed to do, is carrying. Carrying has its own special unique law that doesn't fall into the category of melacha, but because it's something that was done in the temple, in the tabernacle, was needed for the tabernacle, they had to move things from one domain to the other. Sorry? Oh, sorry. You can't carry on Shabbos. I will talk about that in a moment. You cannot carry on Shabbos, but you can carry on Yom Tov. That's what I meant to say. So if you need to carry your machzor to shul or your shofar on your bag on Yom Tov, you can do that, but on Shabbat you can't. All right. So let's first of all, when it comes to cooking, you just have to have yourself prepared. That's what we said. We said last week, it's all about preparing for Shabbat. You want to have all your food ready. Prepare before Shabbat. That's what's important. You put all your food in the oven. You make sure that your oven is off. We don't leave our oven on. So this is where it becomes interesting. For example, if I have our oven, we have 2 ovens in our house because of the Chabad house, but the one oven which we do most of our cooking in, we can't actually use. So what a lot of people do is they'll cook before Shabbos, and they'll leave the food in the oven, so the oven stays boiling hot, and just before Shabbos, they'll turn off the oven. And most ovens retain the heat if you keep the door closed for quite some time. So the food won't be boiling hot, but it'll be pretty hot relatively soon afterwards. And that keeps the food hot. The problem is that with some ovens, including our oven, one of them, when you open the door, the light turns on. So that would be a problem. That you would have to use an oven that doesn't have that issue. The other ways that you could do, so you could leave the food in the oven. The other things that you could do is you can cook. You could cook it beforehand, and you could leave it on a hot plate. I'm going to show you our hot plate. All of you guys have probably seen it. But just for some physical ideas, I will stop sharing for a moment so you can see better. Okay. So here is our hot plate. Why is this hot plate good? What makes this actually good to use on Shabbos? What's the difference between this and leaving my regular stove on? So the thing is, I can use a regular stove, But in order to use a regular stove, I would have to have a covering over it. So we actually have a plain sheet of metal that would go over the stovetop. Why? Because in ancient times, when they had the fires, they had to cover the fire. Why? Because they were worried that a person might stoke the coals in order to make it hotter. So therefore, today, when we have this hot plate has I cannot make it high or low. It has one temperature, and that's what it stays on. Okay, it's not too hot. It's about, I don't know, 100 degrees or something like that. It stays on that, keeps your food hot. It has no temperature. It's safe. It's on. Now, another thing that we use for this is we actually use a timer. So we would only use this for Friday night. Okay, we'd use it for Friday night. It would go on just before Shabbos. The timer would go on. And then just after, just let's say whenever we expect to be finished with our hot food, so we'll put our chicken and our soup and whatever else, rice, we put on here, and it keeps the food hot. And that's not an issue of Shabbos. If you don't have a hot plate, you could use what's called a blech. It's like the silver piece of metal that you put over your stove. Ideally, you would also cover over your knobs. And that is there just to simply, when you put that sheet there, why the rabbis made that decree is, as I said earlier, they would have to cover the coals. And that's to remind you not to stoke the fire. But in today's day, the way we stoke the fire would be by turning it higher or lower. So because that's forbidden, that's why we have to have these covers. Another interesting law. So let's talk about, for example, on cholent. What do we do with cholent? So back in the day, what people did with cholent is they just had a pot and they left it on their blech and on this sheet of metal, and it stayed there all Shabbos. That's the way I grew up. Now today, most people would just use a crock pot. A crock pot is another thing which was, people think that they made it for whatever reason. They really made it for Jewish people to be able to have hot food on Shabbos. It's a slow cooker. It cooks your food slow. It's meant to cook overnight, and it comes out just perfect the next day when you have it. So you put it on. Ideally, there are details of how you're supposed to do it. You should still cover the knobs. We still try to put what's called, because it's sunken in, you'd still put maybe a sheet of silver foil around the actual pot that goes into the heating base around it, and you'll still try to cover the knob. But halakhically, that's 100% okay. So that's how you have your hot food on Shabbos. Now, the next thing that I wanted to give you, talk about, is when it comes to cooking, is making hot drinks on Shabbos. Okay, so let's say I wanted to have a hot cup of coffee. So you wouldn't have an urn that goes on and off. You would have, sorry, not a kettle. You would have an urn, something like this. That the thing about this is you leave it on and it just keeps the heat going for the whole of Shabbos. That's what we use. I know during the small break that we had between lockdowns, our white one ended up breaking, and you know, some people came to shul and there was nothing hot to drink. But so the good thing about this is that it keeps your water hot for the whole of Shabbos, and you don't touch the knob. It boils before Shabbos and it stays there. You can have hot water, but it gets a little bit more tricky than that. So let me explain to you. I've got water in it. By the way, this water is cold, so don't worry. But I left some water in so I could explain to you what I'm going to do. Now here it gets very interesting. If I put, so let me try to make this sound somewhat more. Okay, so I've got my coffee. Now, some people, I'm not going to mention names, those that know they don't drink this type of coffee. I want to tell you, on Shabbos, this is more or less the only type of coffee you can drink, because you can't filter. It's another whole category which I don't want to get into because it's not a main category. You're not supposed to filter. So you would, the only type of coffee that we could really serve on Shabbos is instant coffee, right? But not only that, I can't go and put the coffee into the cup, because then what's going to happen is I'll put the coffee into the cup, then I'll put my cup over the hot water, I'll turn it on, boiling hot water is going to come and go directly onto my coffee. So what is actually happening to the coffee inside this cup? It's boiling. I'm cooking that coffee on Shabbos. So what would I do? I do what's called the Kli Sheni. So we actually have a little pitcher that actually keeps the water hot. So I take from my urn, pour into there, fill it up, then pour into everybody's cups and everybody adds in. That's a perfect way to do it. But otherwise, when I'm not doing that, I first pour into here, trying to make this that you guys could see. Okay, so I first pour my hot water into here. Then I take my cup. I don't pick up the urn, not advised. When it's boiling hot, you will burn yourself. Then you take your hot with cup boiling, you pour it into a second glass. Now what you've done is you've taken the boil out of it. It's no longer boiling. It's still hot. You will still burn yourself, probably. But the rabbis figured that by putting it into the second cup, it would not actually be on that same level of boiling. And then only after you put it into the second cup, you would then add the coffee and sugar and everything else that you want to put in. All right. So that's the way you would make coffee to make sure, or tea, that it doesn't boil. If you could handle this type of coffee, that's maybe the way religious Jews are drinking cheap coffee, instant coffee or whatever it is, because in Shabbos, that's what the easiest way to drink. Okay. So I'm going to pause for a moment and just share my other screen again. Okay, so going back to what we were saying before, we want to prepare certain things. What do you have to do before you prepare for Shabbos? On the start of Shabbos, you want to make sure that if it's that your food is raw and edible, you remove it from the heat source, and you can't place food on a covered fire. So you can place cooked solid near a fire. I'm not going to get into all these details, but just if you want to know them, remove all the food from the oven, and the hot water should be boiled before Shabbat. Okay, now we just went over this, just showing you over here another example. Okay, let's talk about electricity for a moment. I've tried to bring as many examples that I can actually share with you today. So let's look at electricity. We don't use electricity. I'm not going to get into the exact things of which categories it falls into, because today's electricity, by the way, is not most, especially LEDs, for example. If you have to use electricity when it's like LED lights, it's rabbinical. It's actually not even biblical. We still don't do it. For us, that doesn't make much difference if it's rabbinical or not. But another issue that we're going to have is going to be, for example, using our refrigerators on Shabbos. Now, today's day and age, many fridges come with something called Shabbat mode. You'd be surprised how many companies, Fisher and Paykel and Bosch, they're making special things for a small minority group called Jews, and they have what's called Shabbos and Yom Tov mode. Now, we have it on one of our fridges, and one of our fridges doesn't have it. That one fridge that has it, what we do is there's a button that we press, we hold it down for a few seconds, and the light will go off, and certain functions in the fridge will just work automatically. It won't pick up that the door has been opened. And what that causes to do is that there's no light going on and nothing is being caused to go on as a result of me opening the door. And that light will stay off for at least 48 hours. Some have a 72 hours. Ours only works for 48 hours. So on the Yom Tov, we actually have an issue. The other thing, if your fridge doesn't have that, then very often there'll be a little tab. Either you could take out the light bulb. In one of our fridges, we actually took out the light bulb. Or if you cannot take out the light bulb, you would just, sometimes it's something that you could just put like a piece of sticky tape over the place where the door opens, and there's a little button that causes the light to go on, and you just cover that and the light starts coming off. All right, so that's the way you take care of that. Another thing we could take care of is lights. Lights, we could have, some of the lights in our house have a timer. So I want to show you something pretty cool, if you don't mind me saying. Now, this is called a Shabbos lamp. I'll show you quickly how it works. So in our bedrooms, so in the main part of the house, we either leave the lights on or off. So like our dining room, we've now put in a timer to save on electricity. So it will go off at, like, let's say midnight, and then boom, finished. So if you're talking, the arson, the kitchen light stays on. We don't have a timer over there. It just stays on for the whole Shabbos. The bathroom lights are not on a timer. They stay on the whole Shabbos. But the bedroom lights, we don't want them on at all. So what do we have? Oh, it's pretty bright, huh? Let me stop the share so you can see this again. Okay, so we have this little lamp. It's called the Shabbos lamp. It's very bright, as you can tell. I turn it on. I leave it on for the whole of Shabbos. Now, what do I do if I want to go to sleep? I just do this. Watch. So basically what that did is it covers it. It's still on. It is actually still on, but it's totally cold, especially with LED lights. You can't see. It's safe. And as I open it, you'll see the light starts getting brighter and brighter. And that was it. So it's got a lid over. There's a whole bunch of today's day and age. There's a whole bunch of different versions of this. And that's what we do in bedrooms, at least bedrooms of adults. we don't have one in all the kids' bedrooms, but we have a few of them in the house. They're not that expensive. And then you could have light in your room. And halachically, now you may ask the following question: why are we trying to find ways to get over all the restrictions of Shabbos? You know, God said, do not turn on lights. So why are you trying to find ways around it? God says, don't put on heat or whatever it is. And the answer to this would be, you know, for example, if you're looking at the pandemic, example from the pandemic, you know, if somebody says, what's his name? Andrews has now said, the Premier of Victoria has said that we're not allowed to visit older people. You're not allowed to visit people. You have to have social distancing. Don't be in contact with people. And then I hear out that my friend, Mr. Joe, has decided he's found a way to be in contact with people. He's using Zoom. And I say, what are you trying to find ways to get around? He said, don't be in contact with old people and it's dangerous. No, we understand that that's not logical. Why? Because what was the danger to the old people was the physical contact. That's why I don't like the term social distancing. It's the physical contact that is the problem. But just seeing contact through virtual is perfectly fine. The same thing is when Hashem said, don't light a fire. Let's say electricity was in the category of fire. It's not clear. It is clear, but I don't want to get into all the specifics, which one falls into which category. But let's just say, for example, I said, don't light a fire. And let's say electricity falls into the category of fire. I'm not saying it does, but let's say it did, for simplicity's sake. The Torah says, don't cause a fire. But if you could find a way around it, you're not being creative. All you do is you're just closing and opening a door. That's 100% allowed. Nevertheless, there are certain times that the rabbis didn't like us to find too many leniencies. For example, when they said about timers, it was generally frowned upon to, for example, make your TV on a timer. I had certain relatives of mine that they were religious, but you know, they couldn't miss certain TV shows. So when it came 3 o'clock in the afternoon, boom, suddenly the TV would go on and their favorite show would go on. And Saturday afternoon, they would sit around watching TV. That is not really acceptable for the reason that what we call it's not in the spirit of Shabbos. But that's something different. Not being in the spirit of Shabbos is not the same thing as being halachically forbidden. So there's a concept that we're not supposed to do things that are not in the spirit of Shabbos. Okay, so let's go on a little bit. I'm going to get back onto our screen. All right, so we spoke about electricity. Now let's talk about, Another great example of this is Shabbos mode. Let's talk about now, what about carrying, leaving home? So now we know that in many cases, okay, so we know the cars could be problematic and carrying could be problematic unless there's an Eruv. Now, the way an Eruv does, what an Eruv is it's actually from the time of King Solomon. But in our area, for example, in Dingley, it does not exist, although many people are trying to make it happen. Several people want to make it happen in Dingley, so that it'll be more, livable, so to speak, for religious people. Talking about Melbourne being the most livable city, I think Dingley is going to become the most livable place. It depends what you consider livable. But from a religious perspective, having an Eruv makes it just that much more livable. Then you can go leave the house with your kids and things like that. So that's something called an Eruv. And basically what it does is it causes the place to become a private domain. You're allowed to carry within a private domain. You're not allowed to carry from a private domain to a public domain. So there's a whole complicated part in halacha how you can make something into private domain, and that's through what's called an Eruv. There are certain people that are against Eruvs, people that won't use them, not that they're necessarily against, they won't use them for numerous reasons, but one of the main reasons is, for example, if you get too used to an Eruv and you grow up in a place with an Eruv, you won't be used to checking your pockets. You're supposed to, the halacha says before you go out your house and before Shabbos, you're supposed to check your pockets. You won't be used to it. And then you might come to a place like Dingley where there's no Eruv and your whole life you've been living in St. Kilda and now you are stuck and you forgot to, and you end up carrying on Shabbos. That's one of the reasons why some people don't use the Eruvs. There's numerous other reasons, but that's the only one I'll get into tonight. So what happens if you need to carry your keys on Shabbat? So once again, I'll stop sharing so that you can see this. So here's what we call a bendel. So it's or a Shabbos belt. What this does, it has two little keys at the end, rings at the end. And then what you would do is you would stick, ideally you would have one side of the key on this side, one side on this side. And now the key is actually holding the string together and the key becomes part of the belt. You wouldn't, tie it and then stick the key on here, because then the key is just being carried by the string and it's just actually carrying. You would have to tie it that the key is actually holding the two ends together, and then it is considered that you're not carrying. And that's the way people manage to carry keys and get keys in and out of their house, throughout time. Okay, let's go back to a few more examples and then I want to go into Havdalah. Okay, I want to just, sorry. Okay, so there's one other category of forbidden things that we don't do on Shabbos, which is something rabbinical. It's called the muksa. Muksa are things that we're not supposed to move. Now, this is a rabbinical decree that the rabbi saw that people were taking Shabbos and they were starting to move all their tools around and they were using it as a day as reorganization. And they made a decree. They said, well, people are not really stopping and appreciating Shabbos. And then also, and furthermore, if they're going to be doing this, they're going to forget that it's Shabbos and they're going to start using their tools. So there was two issues with it. Number one, it was mundane. And number two, it was going to cause people to do. So they said there was something called muksa. Now what muksa in short means, anything that you don't use on Shabbos, you're not allowed to move. So for example, your spade is muksa on Shabbos because you can't do anything permissible with it. Your screwdriver, your food processor, your phone, all those things that you're not allowed to use on Shabbos, you're not supposed to move them. You can touch them as long as they don't move. Your candlesticks, you can't use on Shabbos, so you're not allowed to move them. That's why you put them in a place before Shabbos where they are moving. Now, there are ways around this once again. The rabbi said, if you move it, for example, in an abnormal way, for example, if you took a candlestick and you had to move it and you were really desperate, you could use it by, for example, get two people moving the candlesticks together, something that could normally be moved together. If you do it in an abnormal way, or if you move it with your foot, that's one way that you can do it. Not ideal, but that's the way around it. So it's only there to remind you that you shouldn't be using it, and to keep Shabbos different and special. So what happens if it has a loud use, or what happens if you need the space? If you need the space, you try to move it in a way that is unusual. So you could use your elbow. Let's say you come to your Shabbos table and you left your phone there. So you could kind of shovel with your elbow into a bag, and then you cook the bag, whatever. There's ways to go about it in some type of abnormal way. Or if you need the space, then it can be permissible. Now, one more thing I'm going to get before I get into Havdalah and wrap things up. I wanted to talk to you about when things are allowed. That basically, in those last 20 minutes, I've kind of summed up almost all laws with regards to Shabbos that are practical. And there's going to be thousands of questions, thousands of these books that have been written about the different intricacies and the different details of each of the things. We can go into much more categories that you could think of, but those are the general categories in a real nutshell of what Shabbos is. But what's the exception to all these rules? The exception to all these rules is if it is something which is definitely, if it's a life-threatening situation, so pikuach nefesh, then it is definitely allowed to be overridden. Now, if it's not a life-threatening situation, but somebody's unwell, but you would have to be certain it's not life-threatening. But if it may be life-threatening, you can, if you're not sure if it's life-threatening, then you can break the Shabbos. Okay, but if you're certain that it's not, but the person is terribly sick, so then the best way to do it is through a Gentile person. Okay, so example of this is on your last Yom Kippur, my wife went into labor. So what happened? We had to get a car to go to the hospital. It's Yom Kippur. It's not just Shabbos. It's Yom Kippur. So what did I do? It comes like 1 o'clock in the morning. I picked up the phone. I made the phone call, and I went with her. Why? Because I would actually be a help to her in that case, and I was allowed to go with her. And she, for the whole of Yom Kippur, was considered somebody in need, and she was more or less allowed to do whatever she needed to do. But I was, once I had taken care of her, I wanted to get back to shul. It was our first Yom Kippur and Shabbos, and I needed to get back to shul. So what do? It's a 2.5-hour walk, or whatever it was, a 2-hour walk. I'm fasting. Anyway, I can't take a taxi back. I took a taxi with her because I was going with her. I could have even taken a taxi if I had to help her. But now it's not a life-threatening situation, so I had to walk back. Right? I didn't have to go to shul. It wasn't life-threatening if I wasn't going to be in shul. I wanted to be in shul, so I walked back. And I didn't think that even fasting while walking was going to put me in any type of danger, besides from making me very hungry and thirsty. So that's what I did. So that's how you see the distinction between all these types of things. Now, what happens if you have a tremendous need? What happens if your light in your shul is off, and people have to daven? If you have a non-Jewish person, if it's called what's called a great need, you can get a Gentile person to help in those cases. So if it's not life-threatening and it's a big need, generally there are exceptions, but generally you can get somebody to help you. Okay, let's finish off Shabbos. I did say that we'd talk about benching last week, but I think we'll leave it also for another time. But I want to talk about Havdalah. So let's look at the Havdalah ceremony. Havdalah is like, they called it over here, a coping ceremony. Why is it called a coping ceremony? What is Havdalah? Havdalah literally means a separation. It's dividing between the Monday of life and the spiritual of life, the holy. But it's very interesting. In Judaism, we don't really believe that you have to fully disconnect from the holy to the mundane, but we believe that they are very different. So when we stop, the holiness is, so to speak, leaving, It's not fully leaving. And that's why we want to create a separation. And we do this with a cup of wine, ideally. If you can't have a cup of wine, you have grape juice, or if you really need, you could even do a bottle of beer. You could even do beer. What do we have? We have the besamim, we have a candle which has numerous wicks to it, and we have the cup of wine. So let's go through about it. What's the whole purpose to it? The whole purpose, if I look at the wording, you say, look at the screen, you say, indeed, God is my deliverance. I'm confident. I'm confident and shall not fear, for God, the Lord, is my strength. And so why are we starting this prayer? Because when a person is leaving Shabbos, Shabbos is such a beautiful and calming day, and now it's coming to an end. You may not feel it, but definitely our souls feel some level of sadness and fear, because now they're entering into the mundane world. The mundane world is a scary place for a soul, because it might fall into all types of traps and whatever. But we say, no, don't worry. God is with you. You're going to take the Shabbos with you. We go on to say, if you look over here, the Lord of Hosts, Hashapi, and we say, La'ihudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason v'kar. That's a line from Megillat Esther, that for the Jews there was light and joy, gladness and honor. So let it be with us. And we actually say first, when the person saying Havdalah gets that, he says it, and then the people that are listening say it, and then he says it afterwards, to remind us of, when we read the Megillah, we say this out loud as well, to remind us that there's going to be joy and light, and God is escorting us. What do we do with this time? We're remembering it's about escorting us from the holy into the mundane, but really bringing the holy into the mundane. That's what we're truly trying to achieve over here. So we use our four senses to do it. We use, number one, we use wine. We first make a bracha on the wine. We say wine because weiss is coarse, we want to connect our entire body. We make the bracha on the kiddush, on the wine. We want to elevate our coarseness, that it shouldn't feel so to speak, elevated to the level of Shabbat. The next thing we smell. Smell is something outside of you. It's not just for your own pleasure, but it's something from outside that you're benefiting from. Then you do the blessing on the candle. The candle is something that represents your eyesight. You see the candle. Interestingly enough, when we do the candles, we're supposed to at least some people have the custom that only men do it, and we show we look at our nails. Why do we look at our nails? The reason why we look at our nails is to remind us that growth is about to happen. The fastest place where we have the most growth all week is in our nails. That's where things grow the fastest. That's more noticeable. Sometimes hair can grow quite fast as well, but the way it's most noticeable is because we're constantly cutting our nails, keeping them short. We notice that growth the most. So every week Shabbos comes out, we want to look at our nails and say, look, I may have exited from Shabbos, but growth is happening. I'm going to really grow. We don't look at leaving Shabbos as a time of failure, but really as a time of growth. And then when we're looking at it, we also talk about one second. So we also talk about our intellect. So we now have when we looked at the candles, we're seeing, what do we see? Be able to see beyond our world, be able to see stars and the moon, and be able to see beyond ourselves. And that's what happened. The last thing is we are connecting to our intellect with the blessings, and that intellectual part of the Havdalah is in order to remind us that with our mind is where we perceive truth and honesty and things like that. So give me a second. Okay, so let me show you a few other things about the Havdalah quickly. So I want to tell you a few, what I think, pretty interesting things. So we had the bracha on the wine, then on spices, and then on the candle. And this part is the intellectual part, where we distinguish between the holy and the mundane. Now, this is a really important concept. If you were to ask people, hey, Sophie, if we were to ask people, what's one of the most important principles in Judaism, is this concept, the ability to differentiate between what is good and what is bad. Because in our world, we're told this is a world which is mixed between good and evil. And here is where it all occurs. Why do we do this Havdalah? What are we doing Havdalah? Remember, where's the first Shabbos come from? First Shabbos comes from when God created the world. And when God created the world on the sixth day, right just before Shabbos, Adam and Eve sin. Now, what Hashem does is, even though they've sinned, they say there's a tremendous spiritual light in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, where they were, for the whole duration of Shabbos. And then, as Shabbat comes to an end, so we're told even during Friday night, that first night of their lives, God kept it light the whole time. They had light, the spiritual light stayed the whole time, even though they had sinned. But when Shabbat ended, they went into a darkness. And what God did is he gave them the gift of fire. Now, this is very significant, the gift of fire. Why do we light the candle on Saturday night? I told you one thing is because to remember, represent our eyesight. But more important is to remind us that Adam and Eve were given 2 flintstones, and God said, here's flintstones, this is how you make fire. That's how you'll make light. Now, that was the first great creation of mankind. As soon as God said, now I've taken away your light, I've put you in the darkness, and you are going to, Adam and Eve, for the first time, were really frightened. When? On Saturday night. Because suddenly they were thrust out of the Garden of Eden, and they were thrust into this darkness. But God said, no. This is how you make fire. This is how you make light. And from this is how you're going to create. This is how you're going to create. Everything is going to come from this. You know, there's a fascinating little talk by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, where he tells us about this the Greek Prometheus. Prometheus, I hope some of you may know this concept, that Prometheus discovers fire. And in Greek mythology, legend, when Prometheus discovers fire, Zeus, who's the Lord, the god of fire, gets really angry at him. And what he does is something gruesome. He ties him up, he chains him up, and he makes an eagle bite off his liver, chew off his liver. And why is he doing this? Because his power, which is the power of fire, was now discovered by Prometheus. And as a punishment, he punishes him in this evil way. And you contrast that with what Judaism believes, that fire was given to us. The moment we enter darkness, God said, here, to you, the world, you're starting now a new week. You have just come from this holiness. Now, what do I want you to do? I'm giving you the light to continue. Now, making light, I've done everything. I've put everything in this world. The only thing I have to show you is how you make light. And that's the fire of the Havdalah. That's the power that you have of the Havdalah. So this is something which is extremely powerful, I think, when we're talking about Havdalah and its power. So there's another really interesting thing that we do on Shabbos, on Saturday night. What is accustomed to do is something called a Malava Malka. A Malava Malka is that we're supposed to have a festive meal at the end of Shabbos. People generally light candles and they try to wash and have bread, and we try to have a hot drink. If you don't have washed bread, at least you have something which is the bracha of mezonot, like a piece of cake or a cracker or something. And what's the reason for that? Malava Malka means escorting the queen. And the reason is because when Shabbos has come out, we're trying to appease ourselves. We smell. What are we doing with that smell of someone? Our soul has feelings a little bit faint because we're told that we have an extra portion of our soul. We have a deeper connection to our soul on Shabbos, and we lose it on Saturday night. So the soul, so to speak, revives us. The sight is going to tell us and gives us the strength to be creative and to go on. And then we, of course, intellectually connect to this differentiation between the good and bad and the mundane. But it's not about, in Judaism, we're not about separating good and bad, but we also want to try to bring and bridge the mundane and the holy. We want the holy to enter into the mundane. And that's why we have the Havdalah, where we get those candles, we have those matches, and we also have the Melva Malka, which is that escort. We're escorting the queen and the holiness into our whole week. And Melava Malka is actually looked Peter's Sophie has added a few gruesome details to the story. I try to leave out all the very details, but thank you for checking those out. But I suppose at least the concept of how we are lucky to be who we are, to be Jewish, and our philosophy is so different. We don't look at God as being some terrible, greedy type of monster power seeking, which is the way he's looked at in many other circles. God is there to give us the tools to find ourselves and to find our own strength. And that's the whole thing of Shabbos, and particularly Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, when we enter into the mundane. And we're told that the first 3 days after Shabbos, we live off the inspiration of the next week. And the next 3 days, we're going to be from Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, it's a preparation for the week to come. But we say, Minei misparchim kol hayomim, from Shabbos, all other days are blessed. And from it, we prepare Shabbos through it. It is there to prepare Shabbos. Okay? So with that, I conclude tonight's class with saying that we've spoken about a whole variety of things. We've discussed the basics of the laws of Shabbos and how Shabbos works. But at least I think the fundamental lessons that we could learn from Shabbos is all about learning that we have to, it's all there to guide us, to allow us to bring out the most that we can in our life. And God gives us those tools, those fire, those lights, those candles, in order for us to achieve what we want to achieve. I want to finish off with one little short story. Yehuda Avner, who was the ambassador to Australia from Israel, and later on he was ambassador, I think, to some other countries. He was also an assistant to numerous Israeli prime ministers, and he numerous times went to visit the Rebbe. At one time he went to the Rebbe and he was talking to the Rebbe for a while. He's actually got some video, but he said to the Rebbe, tell me, what is your mission? What is your job to do in this world? What are you trying to achieve? You've got sort of all these shluchim and these organizations around the world. What are you trying to achieve? To which the Rebbe answered, you have a candle. And I believe that every Jew is a candle. I simply want to light every candle. I want, the soul is the candle, it's there. It just has to be lit. I'm trying to light those candles. Anyway, when Yehuda Avner left the room, as he was about to leave, he says to the Rebbe, tell me, have you lit my candle? The Rebbe said, no, I don't light candles. All I do is I give you the matches. And you have to light your own candle. That's the lesson of the Saturday night. That's the lesson the Rebbe was telling us. That's what he looks at as his mission. But that's really God's mission. God's mission is he gives us that fire on Saturday night. And he says, I want you to light your own candle. You get the fire. You have the strength to light your candle. You have the matches. I'm not going to light it for you because he's already got it. You got everything. It's up to you to light your own fire. Okay. So that ends formally our class tonight. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions, please feel free to say them. Unmute yourself.
Thank you very much.
You can ask on anything from Shabbos to Saturday nights and anything in between. Just don't make them too hard, because then I won't have the answer. No, I'm just kidding.
Rabbi, I'd like to ask one which it came up in a little discussion in WhatsApp a few weeks ago. We were looking at the Hebrew words which describe, talk about malacha, like work, or those works. Melech, which is king, melach, which is salt, and the relationship between those Hebrew words. It became a very interesting discussion because I don't know, some people may know this, but the word salary in English, it comes from like an old term that was used for salt, which is how people used to be paid. A long time ago, they'd be paid in salt, and that turned into salary to mean wages. So, melach, salt. On the other hand, melech, king. There seemed to be a connection between these different words, even though they have slightly different spelling.
Very interesting.
And that's why, as we were talking about the work before, but we're distinguishing between effort versus constructive, creative activity. And when I brought this up in the chat group, someone pointed out that the shorish, the root of these words, is that the king, for example, melech, what constitutes, and indeed the word for angels as messengers of a king, is that king exercises discretion. King can make choices, decide. So that's sort of the origins of that word. But malacha is quite different. It's a lower level. Anyway, I thought I'll just mention that as possibly a subject for a future shiur, to look at the concepts, and it's probably not coincidence that the words are linked that way.
100%. No, it's definitely an interesting topic. I don't know much about it, but I'm noticing that when I'm looking at you, I'm not looking at you because my camera is much higher than where I am. So sorry, it looks like I'm not looking at you, but
yeah.
So I'm trying to play around because my camera's up there. Okay, very fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. I don't know if I'd be able to give a full share just on that, but if you look at those words, similar to the cholent and all these words, malacha, and where they come from, you definitely come up with something interesting with the word etymologies. Definitely something fascinating. Okay. Any other questions? How's Jana, how's Noach doing? Is he back home?
He's home, thank you. He is happy to be home, but I think all the excitement is caught up with him, so.
Okay. All right, I just, I don't know if you want to talk about it over here, but anyway, good. I'm glad you're here. He told me he was coming home. Okay. Thank you so much. Please send him regards. And please God, we should only have good news to share with each other. Thank you, everybody, for joining. So next week, we're going to, please God, talking about some very interesting, basically going through major or the main daily rituals that people do. And if people are enjoying that style, the practical stuff, we'll continue with it. Otherwise, we could take a break for a few weeks and go on to other things. Okay.
Rabbi, may I mention on that very topic, there's some obvious, and I think we talked about it privately by phone as well, but with the Yom Tovim coming up, the Jewish New Year, Yom Kippur, in these very strange times, it certainly does raise a list of fascinating practical questions which a lot of us are going to confront for the first time. The whole idea of Rosh Hashanah in the current environment, and one of the things I mentioned on the phone is normally what people do before Rosh Hashanah is they'll make an effort to head out to Glicks or whatever and get the special round challah for the Yom Tov, and how that's going to work this year. The question of shofar, how people can this year hear the shofar, let alone, and I even mentioned on the phone about Birkat Kohanim, and the conducting of services during these Yom Tovim. Now, I understand that there are programs underway at the moment to look into those questions, but could they possibly be part of a future shiur?
Sure, 100%. I'll definitely be doing a share before Rosh Hashanah on practical halacha things. Well, I don't want to, first of all, I don't want to do it too early. That's number one. So as we're getting closer, definitely probably the 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, we'll do something practical. Number two is Sinai and Under, which is restarting. We're doing a high holiday series starting this Thursday. And that's going to be all focused on Rosh Hashanah, more inspiration and information, but not as much, not as practical. And I'm hoping that the 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, I'll be talking practical stuff. I also want to see what the guidelines are so I could be more relevant as possible. So we're waiting for that to come out. So as soon as I know anything, I will let you know, and we definitely will be having those classes. And if there's things that you particularly want to talk about in those classes, more than the obvious things like shofar and davening and how to do those things, then you're more than welcome to send me a message or something. But we'll get there the week or two before Rosh Hashanah.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay, have a good night. Thank you so much for coming. Good to see everybody, and send regards. Good night.
Good
Bye.
night. Bye.
Thank you. See ya.
Thank you so much.